All right, welcome. Here we are to episode 2 of the Peak State Fit Experience podcast, recorded from Peak State Fit Performance Center, located here in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's actually snowing. Gillian and I were originally planning on recording here in the studio, but I think it was a good plan because as I look out the window, there's about 5 fresh inches of snow. So you are listening to our second episode. The first season of our podcast will follow the modules of Nail Your First IRONMAN, which is a course that I have just recently created and is now available for $189. The course has 35 video lessons covering the 4 pillars of IRONMAN: swim, bike, run, and nutrition, plus tips from my 34 years of racing and 20 years of coaching experience. Peak State Fit has placed an importance on education since our inception, and our business mission is to share knowledge and empower others through education. Last week, we talked about inspiration with Kayla Bowker. And if you missed that show, please head over and listen on Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. And thank you to those that reported the technical error. We do realize that it was our first week and I double uploaded the audio, but I'm glad that I double uploaded rather than missing the whole thing entirely. So this week we are aiming for success, and I'm happy to introduce my guest, Gillian Micoli. Gillian has been an endurance athlete since she was 9 years old. She has been swimming competitively and introduced to her first kids tri team when she was about 10 years old. And that was 2 loops on the track, a bike ride on her banana seat bike, and a nice 500-yard swim. Her first real triathlon was at 19, and stepping her game up to her dad's steel frame Peugeot equipped with the down tube friction shifters. We all had that if you're of a certain age. And then since those days, Gillian has completed 5 full Ironmans. I'm not going to tell about the first that is in her bio because that's one of our questions. And she did race Kona, which we're also going to talk about this year. She raced it. So Gillian currently races for Team Octagon Elite and is coached by Cam Watt out of Brisbane, Australia. Gillian graduated from the Simon School of Business with her MBA in 2016. Congratulations. She relocated from New York to Provo in 2019 and works for Qualtrics. She currently works for Qualtrics and lives in Salt Lake City with her boyfriend, Andrew, and her German short hair pointer, Miles. Welcome, Gillian.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So today, the title of today's show is Choosing Your First Ironman. And we are covering a lot of modules from the course, but we don't necessarily talk about the course in each show, in each weekly show. We just talk about little nuggets of it. And then we brought you on today because you're just so well loved in the triathlon community. You bring such a great spirit to your racing. I mean, your pictures from Kona, just like you were smiling and you just embrace that race experience. So I want to start off, just welcome, maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself if you want to. And I definitely want to hear about Kona.
Well, it's awesome to be here. And I'm staring out at just trees just coated in this beautiful snow. So I'm like, it's awesome being here in Salt Lake City. As you said, I relocated here about 3.5 years ago. And any relocation, it kind of takes a little bit to kind of find your people and figure out who are those people that are gonna be your training partners, be your business partners, be all the things. So it's taken a minute, but it's cool to be here and to get to know you and Pat. And so I don't know, everything you said was true, and I'm looking forward to digging more into all the things. So do you want me to start with Kona? Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Where do you want me to start?
So I just thought we'd sort of just start with the excitement of Kona. We're going to dive in and actually go back and talk about your first Ironman and let you share some of that experience with us in a bit. But I really just want to celebrate and maybe share a couple of your high points. So we all see Kona from TV and we all have this vision of what it might be like. But maybe what was different than what you expected, and tell us maybe a couple of the really high points for you.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'll give you the down and dirty, Heather. I don't even know if I've shared some of this on social. Um, so we planned, so I was racing there with Andrew, my boyfriend. He was racing on Saturday, I was racing on Thursday. So we planned for a good stretch of time to be there. We like arrived on Sunday and then we were leaving the following Tuesday. We're like, you know, let's kind of have the first Kona experience. I'd never been to Hawaii before. So my first time in Hawaii, my first time in Kona, all the hype of like, oh, the Kona magic and oh, this and oh, that. And I was like, I actually had like a little bit of a breakdown about a week before going because I was like, I don't want it to be over. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but I
Oh,
had this like sadness where I was like, I'm building this up. I've built up this experience and this desire to do this race for like years. Like, I'm not
yeah,
one of these
yeah.
like uber talented athletes that goes and does their first Ironman and qualifies for Kona. I've had to work really hard for this. And so I like the week before I remember crying to my boss and being like, I don't know why I'm having such a hard time. But I have a really good boss too. Like she's a good
Yeah.
friend of mine. And I was like, I like teared up and I'm like, I don't want this experience to be over. And
Hmm.
so we got there on Sunday. We stayed with Vanessa Forster and Danny and just had this like cute little house like up on the hill. And everyone's like, yeah, you're up on the hill. You won't need air conditioning. You need air conditioning.
It's Hawaii.
So it's Hawaii. It was hot. So the first day we went out on our bikes, I first tip, I would take just a shakeout ride, make sure your bike works before doing what we did, which we like drove up to Javi and we're like, oh, we're gonna do the Javi climb. This will be our like first ride out on bikes. Um, Either we ride in Salt Lake City, it's very windy. We ride in St. George, it's very windy. People told me they're like, oh yeah, it's windy. I have never been so terrified on my bike before. It also may have been predecessed by like a car accident that we got in like an hour beforehand. We were making the
Oh,
turn to Javi
wow.
and Andrew was driving and we actually got T-boned right there. So we literally were
Oh,
in this like
no.
smashed up van. We're both fine. Andrew's
Yeah.
back was a little bit tweaked for the race, but
Oh, no.
he's Andrew. He was super positive.
Yeah.
Um, so and also
So
really
not just a
helpful.
not just a fender bender. I mean, just
No,
like
no.
straight up T-boned.
Like
Yeah.
straight up T-boned. Like the car went into like the passenger side. Luckily, I didn't see it coming,
Wow.
so I didn't like brace myself. But it was, I mean, it shook you up, you know? So you're
Yeah.
also in
Gosh,
like
I'm
a
sorry to hear
rental
that.
car.
Yeah.
No, I
Mhm.
mean, it was kind of just like part of
Yeah.
it. So we, yeah, I was probably more shaken up than I thought. Got out on Javi and was like, I don't want to ride this course. Like, I don't want to do this race. I don't want to ride this course. This is terrible.
Yeah.
And
All those
not
emotions were just.
Yeah, well, not knowing that that was the windiest part of the day and one of the windiest days of the week. On race day, that section was not nearly as bad. Like it was just not, it was windy, don't get me wrong, it was windy,
Yeah.
but it was like also I had in my mind, I'm like, I did that, so I can do it on race day. Like it's
I
just one of
agree.
those things that I,
The wind is always bad, but I do feel like the weather is pretty favorable both days. But yeah, it.
especially for the men. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, we ended up doing like our shakeout ride. I think the big thing that everybody told me for Kona is like, don't watch what other people are doing, don't get caught up in the hype. And I really kind of stuck to that. Like I stuck to my own race plan. At the time, I was actually being coached by Chris Palmquist, and she actually stayed with us. So it was like amazing that I had Chris right with us, and then I
Yeah.
also had Vanessa, who I've done like mental endurance coaching with. So at
Hmm.
one point, I sat down with both of them, and I'm like, gosh, I feel so fortunate. I'm with both of my coaches right now. Like this is so special.
What a game plan.
So seriously, so kind of just like stuck to my guns, did the things that I wanted to do, did some team photo shoots and did some like the underwear run and things like that that were super fun. So I wasn't like a total hermit,
Yeah.
but really kind of stuck to my own thing. And then on race day, like I had some hiccups, like we all do. I think every race has hiccups. Like for me, like they forgot my special needs bag, so I stood there at
Huh?
special needs for a couple minutes for them trying to find it, didn't find it. So the whole second half, so I ride on the specialized Shiv, and
Yeah.
I have the hydration in the back. And my game plan for every Ironman that I've done on the bike is just have a second bottle of nutrition, get off, refill, be on your way, and just be able to drink out of the tube for the like literally the entire rest of the ride. Like I don't have to refill again. So that threw a hiccup in things, and
Of
also
course it did.
yeah. it was one of those things where I was like, no, 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 I'm not going to be that person. I'm going to get stuff off the aid stations. I'm not going to let this like kind of derail my race. But it took a lot of mental energy of like trying to figure out like what are the things that I need to do. Also, the aid stations were a little bit more sparse this year. So like there weren't as many on the bike. I think they removed, I missed one before Javi or before the special needs. So I missed that one. And I think that there was like one or two that they removed from the bike and then definitely less on the run. Um, but I know you say I was smiling the entire time at Kona, but I got to a certain point, like right around the energy lab, and everybody talks about the energy lab. I literally thought it was because Red Bull sponsored it. Like before I
Yeah,
got there, like it was one of those things. I had no idea what the energy lab was. We drove around it and scoped it out, and it's actually like, yes, quite desolate. And it's just,
right.
I mean, there's like, yeah, there's nothing there. And
Very lonely.
yeah, so and it wasn't even the lonely factor. It was like I think at one point I just thought I was off. Like I was like, wow, I gotta put my head between my legs. And I as I did so, I just like lost everything. Like I have never thrown up in a race. I've thrown up after. But I vomited like nobody's business on that race course. So yeah, I it
It's
was
not uncommon to have, for people that typically have a good experience with GI and no nutrition problems. Um, it's not unusual, and I'm sure you've probably heard that in Kona, just that it's so extreme with the heat and the humidity and the heat radiating up off the black, tarmac pavement. So it's not uncommon. And usually, if you can get sick, if you feel like you're on the verge, then you're much better afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's the thing is like with 3 miles to go, climbing up like Mark and Dave Hill, I was like, I got this like boost. I'm like, where did this come from? Like all of a sudden, like, and I was running back into town. I'm like, I think my like max speed was like 620 or something. I'm like, where's this coming from? Like it's just like you have like this whole nice downhill, and then that stretch when you turn that corner and you go back into a Lee drive. I'm like, this is why people come back. Like this is
Hmm.
why people come back. This is
Yeah.
it's just it's like you can't explain it. You got to experience it. Like it's really magical. Which also, Heather, not to lead into, but my first Ironman, I had that kind of same
Go ahead.
experience.
That's our next question is your first Ironman and why did you choose it?
Well, my first Ironman was Lake Placid, and I chose it because I grew up in upstate New York, so it's like a 4.5, 5 hour drive. And so literally it was like, this is our local race, and this is the
Hmm.
iconic Ironman. Like, why
Right.
would I go somewhere else? I remember there was a girl that I knew in the triathlon world from Rochester, and she had done Coeur d'Alene. I'm like, why would anybody go to Idaho? Like, I had no idea how beautiful Coeur d'Alene was, but I remember
It
thinking,
is
like,
so pretty.
why would
Yeah.
you go to Idaho? But yes, it's beauty. I'm actually doing that one this year. Um,
Oh,
but
great.
I chose it because it was like I was coached by a local coach in Rochester. She hosted a camp. We did the course. We spent like 3 days there. We got to like ride the course, run the course. I was familiar with the time zone, the climate, there was no foreign element like that. It's not like Kona where you're like, oh, I'm not used to that heat and that humidity. Lake Placid was where like the weather that I grew up in. Like that's, I
Hmm.
mean, so I was like, this is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It also was really social. Like I knew probably 12 to 15 people that did it, and then like 50 to 100 people that were like out on the course. It felt like I knew so many people there.
Gosh.
So it was like honestly that was also like a magical experience. And the way that you finish Lake Placid, the reason I brought up the finish is you actually finish by going around the Olympic Oval. So they have the torch lit, and you go around, and then you basically like run along the track, and then there's Mike Riley, and he's like, crying out that you're an Iron Man, and
Yeah.
you're on this like Olympic venue, and it's just magical. Like
That is magical.
it's so fun.
Yeah.
So so Andrew's actually doing that one this year.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
I Lake Placid was on my list. I was registered to do that race in 2019 and then ended up crashing and breaking my
Oh,
collarbone. And
uh,
then I actually deferred a couple of times. And then, like a lot of us, the deferral rolled into COVID. And I thought about
uh,
doing Florida, but honestly, I don't think I'm going to do another full distance Ironman. And so
yeah,
Kona
yeah.
2017 was my last race.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
of that distance for the
Yeah.
time being.
Okay.
Yeah. And a couple of times I'll sneak in there and say, what if? And Pat's like, no, there are no what ifs. Let's not talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, awesome. So I have to put my glasses back on because my other screen is like sad. I can't even see that. All right. So, let's talk. We sort of, we said like Placid for you was close to home. You had all the convenience, the support, the family,
Hmm.
just that, everything seemed familiar. So so my first Ironman was Whistler in
Okay.
2013. And I actually chose the opposite. And part of that for me is I was living in Birmingham, Alabama at the time. Pat and I were dating, but we were together. And there are a couple of Ironmans relatively close by. Florida is about 4.5 hours away. I did consider that one as my first. But then I had this moment because I had been to British Columbia before on a family trip with my parents, and I just decided that, and it was Whistler's first year
Hmm.
because they had just moved it back there. And so I just had this aha moment that I decided my first Ironman was going to be a destination race,
Mm.
specifically because of the beauty. And I wanted all the spectacular beauty just to take my mind away
Hmm.
from any kind of suffering, even though it's there. So
Yeah.
for you, like, and then also maybe insights for others. This doesn't have to be your own personal experience, but maybe let's talk about destination race versus hometown race or local race, because we've introduced some things that are obvious, like that support. What are some other things that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah. And my second one that I did was Mont Tremblant. So it's only a 6.5 hour drive. So it's not that far. It's not as far as you went for Whistler.
Mm-hmm.
But it still has some, like, you're exiting the country. Like, it's just
Yeah.
Canada, but at the same time, like, one of the things, I don't know if you found this at Whistler, um, but the Gatorade is different. They don't have Gatorade Endurance. They have regular Gatorade on course. And so it's one of those weird Canadian things where they can't get a
Yeah.
hold of enough of it or something like that. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
actually like the full reason. But looking at little things like that, like, are you able to get, like, if you go especially to, like, there's people that are racing in Finland. Like, are you able to get your pre-race meals? Are you able to get your pre-race nutrition? What does traveling with your bike look like? Are you comfortable, like, breaking it down and building it back up? Um, I ended up, I was registered for Ironman Boulder for my second in 2018. And I ended up actually deferring and changing my registration to Trompon. And my reason for that, to go a little deep, I ended up going
Uh-huh.
through a divorce in 2017, and I'd become very reliant on my ex-husband to, like, break down my bike and build it up,
Mm-hmm.
and also was a little gaslit that I couldn't do it myself. And so I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can travel to Colorado with my bike. I'm so scared
Mm-hmm.
to do that. I'm so scared to do that on my own. I'm just going to do something that I can drive to and that my family can come to for my second one. And that was a big
Smart.
click factor for me.
Mm-hmm.
I've since bought a Thule bike box that it's gone so many places with me, and I've gotten so good at breaking down my bike. I used to have a Speed Concept, and now I have the Shiv, and I was really good at the Speed Concept, and I'm pretty good with the Shiv. And then with Kona, we ended up borrowing. I got Andrew the bike box Allen, and I borrowed a bike box Allen. So we literally had these, like, bright red two, like, matching bike box Allens going through Kona.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at, like, at bike boxes, like, there's a lot of things to consider, especially with traveling.
Absolutely.
And so that's a whole factor. And so I think it's, for some people it's super easy. Some people are really good with their bikes and breaking things down. And some people it's a big consideration. So,
Yeah,
that's not to
it's
be kind
a
of understated.
very important consideration, and I'm so glad you brought that one up because also, I mean, I know that we maybe don't have the luxury, all of us, of even owning our own bike box. So maybe you're
Mm,
relying on borrowing one or renting one. But I
mm,
will say, if you have, or if you're listening to this and you're thinking of purchasing a bike box or borrowing one and you have options, definitely talk to friends.
Hmm.
I don't think that I really want to call out brands here, but there are some very specific brands that we have seen where when your fork mounts to the bottom of the bag and the bag can be pushed from side to side, that the bike can be damaged very easily.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I would say definitely do your research with bike cases, because that is probably one of the most stressful aspects of traveling. Does your stuff get there with you?
Hmm.
And is your bike okay?
Yeah. Yeah,
uh,
exactly. Exactly. And then just like, I mean, traveling for triathlon, it's heavy. You bring a lot of stuff. So like knowing what does your airline charge for baggage fees? Do they charge overage fees? Things like that. Um, Lucky enough, Delta didn't charge me a cent for any of my, and I was overweight every time. So I'm not sure
wow.
how I batted my eyelashes or what status I have, but I like literally didn't have any overage fees. So yeah, but
Fantastic.
it's something to consider because it adds up. Like, I mean, the race fees, the lodging, all the things, like a lot of it just adds up.
It really does. Yeah, so things to think about. I wouldn't discourage anyone from traveling
Hmm.
for their first race. I did it successfully, and then I also planned a vacation afterwards for Pat and I to stay in British Columbia, and it was a
That's
wonderful
awesome.
experience for my first Ironman. But I also think that there are some great points for sticking close to home, and I'm glad
Yeah,
that we had that to share. So,
yeah.
another thing that um, I think that maybe can cause some nerves for beginners is if they live in an area where they feel they maybe can't properly train for the terrain
Mm,
that the race they choose is in.
yeah.
Um, and then, of course, this time of year, if you live in Utah, you're probably on the trainer, unless you live in southern Utah. Um, so, what are some things that you do in your training to help you get ready for those races when you know you
Yeah.
need to get specifically strong for hills or for even for temperature changes?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, so so Ruby and I think I'm not even sure if Zwift has them anymore, but like riding like course specific course, like so riding the Lake Placid course. So we went into like a studio when I was training for my first one. This was back when like CompuTrainers were like cutting edge. We went into like a studio and like literally just did like the Lake Placid course. And I've done that at the band studio. I've done that at home. There's a number of different ways you can ride courses. I think Full Gas now or like offers some. I don't do that as much anymore. I think it's fun to kind of change things up and add those
Mhm.
courses in. The big thing is like, either doing like slow cadence drills, really doing like strength on the bike. So working with Cam, like I'm doing like regular bikes that I like have like very low cadence. So when we say like low cadence, like 50 RPMs and just like pushing like a good amount of watts, it just makes you like I sit there and I visualize climbing Big Cottonwood or climbing Immigration and like staying an arrow and just pushing a big gear. And that's like I do a lot of that. Like and there's so like 15-minute efforts, 30-minute efforts, like simulating just like riding a relentless hill,
Yeah.
knowing that you're going to have to be doing that on race day.
Yeah, tension intervals are definitely spicy, and I know Cam loves them.
He loves them. He loves them.
Yeah,
So,
but such a great way
yeah.
to get strong on the bike. And tension intervals, we will mention, very, very important for strength, as you mentioned. For our listeners, be careful with tension intervals that I would say, progress into them. Start with
Hmm.
some slower, 30
Hmm.
seconds to a minute long. And also, if your knees start to bother you with truly slow cadence, like slower than 50, then maybe increase your cadence until you can build up your durability to those, because they
Yeah.
are very important for that strength training on the bike. Some other things,
This is why you're
whether
the coach and I'm not.
I just thought I would explain a little bit, of the
No,
details for our listeners too.
no, totally.
Uh,
Because that's
yeah,
the thing is often you see somebody like on Instagram or if you listen to a podcast and you're like, wow, I'm gonna go do that. And it's like, cool, you can go do that, but try a couple of steps or get coached. And I would say like my biggest thing of like training for your first Ironman is hiring that coach, getting a structure where you can ask questions. You can like not just like rely on what you see on Instagram because it's not real. 100% of it is not real. And I mean, maybe not 100% is not real, but at the same time, like having
It's
something
not
where you can
individual to
actually,
you.
and it's 100% not individual to you. That's the biggest part. And so, yeah, having that coach, it's like, I think night and day.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, we that's probably one of your tips for training for an Ironman. Yeah, I was going to ask you
There you
your three
go.
top tips. Um, I do want to jump back though before we're finished with specificity of like how can you train to make those adaptations when you live somewhere drastically different than the place that you're
Mm,
going to be racing. Because for me, again, back to sharing experiences about my first Ironman, I love to swim. I mean, I like you. I've been swimming year round competitively since I was 6 years old, but
hmm
I do not like to be cold. And
mm,
so, knowing that I was going to be swimming in very cold water in Canada, I started doing cold water showers. And I really think that that helped. I also did those like before races, like Oceanside, where the water's really cold. But just,
hmm
turning that dial after a warm shower and getting used to the feeling of the cold really helped me. Um,
Yeah.
and then you can do the opposite with hot races, do heat adaptation. I'll post it in the show notes now that I've mentioned it. But Pat wrote an article this year for Cycling West about heat adaptation, and we have a very specific sauna protocol. And we didn't reinvent the wheel, but I'll add that in the notes because if you're going to a hot place, it's a good protocol.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
training
Adding to that,
tips. Yeah,
yeah,
go
adding
ahead.
to that, I definitely sat in the sauna and I also like I have a very small trainer room and I just close the door and I don't use a fan. And so like using those kind of like just I mean
Yeah.
just suffering through it. I also did this swim. I did it as a relay, the swim for Escape from Alcatraz in
Oh,
2011
yeah.
or something like that. So the water was like 52, I want to say.
Hmm.
And so it was, I did all of those things as well, like the cold showers, the cold water on your face, getting used to your face being cold.
Yeah.
Um, and just, I mean, that helped. It also like, don't discount adrenaline because like, I think sometimes like you're up here too much and you're like, you just have to trust your body that like you've done all the right things and you're going to be okay. Also get into the water before like, so St. George is always a cold swim. I always do a couple of like swims in the water and it never seems as cold on race day as it did the couple of days before. So if the race
Very
venue allows
valuable
for that,
information. Yeah.
it's so helpful.
Hmm. I agree 100%. Um, and also if you can, I think even we probably won't dive too much into actual race day because we're still sort of, in this module of planning our races, but also we can really dive deep in a future episode about body language and what you do on race day to help you have a great day. Because when you are standing around tense and cold and everything about your body language is saying, I'm fearful, then you're just carrying that mindset right into your day. And so I tell people
Mm-hmm.
to do jumping jacks, push ups, whatever they need to do to stay loose and happy because they don't want to be tight and fearful.
Yeah.
So, other tips that you might have specific to a beginner's mindset. And last week I asked Kayla, who just accepted her pro license, and
It's awesome.
to go back to that beginner mindset, and let's help some people with some training tips.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, So, I mean, I don't know. The one of like, don't do anything new on race day. I think like everybody says it, but listen to it. I'd say that like that carries through. I even find myself to this day like being like, oh, should I try that? Should I add that? Like, should I, So like you get so much external like influence, and I think that ties right back to like to having the coach. I remember for my first, it was back when like the big tailed like aero helmets were like a big deal,
Yeah.
and I was like going back and forth of like, do I get this helmet? Do I borrow my friend's helmet? Do I do this? Do I do that? And I was able to go to my coach and say, like, what helmet should I use? Should I use this helmet or not? And he basically walked me through like what are the benefits of using it and what are the costs, like because if you keep your head up, like if you're a newbie and you've got your head down and you're looking at your bike computer, it doesn't do you any benefit. So we talked through that. We talked through like, can I practice with it beforehand and things like that. And I ended up using it. And I think it was a good decision to use it. But it was one of those things that I was like, should I, and also like knowing how you spin your wheels on things. And sometimes just having that conversation, making a decision, and then moving on versus like perseverating on it and wasting all this energy of like, did I do the right thing? It's like, you don't know until you try. And granted, you want to make calculated mistakes and calculated decisions when it comes to race day because you've put so much into it. Um, but figuring out a way to like to calculate those decisions, I think is a big component of that versus just being like, you know, kind of just going willy nilly on things. Um, I think the other thing is understanding what taper looks like. And taper looks like it looks different for everyone.
It does,
I think, and I think
depending on age,
understanding
fitness.
exactly, exactly. And so understanding like what does that look like? And maybe for some people it means just make sure you're getting like more sleep. Like I am someone that like I need a lot more sleep than I think an average person. Like I thrive off of like 9.5 hours and people think I'm nuts. They're like, I don't know how you get that. I don't always get it. I think last night, because I had to get up early to get my training done to get on this podcast, I was like, I think I got just shy at 8, but I really prioritize sleep. So that's kind of all combined into like one tip, Heather, but I think that's at least three
Those
or
are
four. I don't.
definitely, I was able to mentally separate them. And, going back, I do want to highlight that value of a coach. And even if somebody can't hire a coach to have comprehensive coaching throughout their entire Ironman training experience, I think making sure that if you can't hire a coach and you're following a training plan, that possibly another option is to do a couple of strategic consultations
Hmm.
throughout, just specified periods of the training. But you're absolutely correct that when you have a professional there to give you valuable advice, you can expend that energy on other things like your training and your recovery. And like you said, not just spinning your wheels trying to make a decision.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And
And you
your
don't
decision might not be,
realize,
yeah,
well, and you don't realize how much energy you waste mentally with some of these things. Like it really detracts from being able to like put your best foot forward with your training. I think the last thing I will say is trust your process. Trust
mm-hmm.
like if you've decided to follow a plan, if you've decided to hire a coach, if you've decided to do whatever it is, like trust your process. Like be all in on your process and really like that kind of goes back to like tuning out the noise. But I work with Vanessa and that's like her big thing is she's like you need to be like 100% on whatever decision you've made in terms of that guidance, that coach, that plan that you're following and really like get excited about it. And so that's kind of where I'm at
Yeah,
right now as well.
yeah. And what a great piece of advice to wrap up on. So this isn't an official question, but a very important question as we look out at the snow. Um, Tell us how you find the motivation on a cold day to get to the pool. Because that's like it's what I hear all the time. And honestly, like as much as I'm a water baby, that is honestly how I feel most of the winter is like I'm so warm, in the car with the heated seats, and I just don't want to get out of the car to step into the pool.
Yeah, I think I try not to overthink it and I try to just like, bodies in motion stay in motion. And so like if I stop and think about how much I don't want to get in the pool, it's like it's an endless battle that I'm going to lose. So typically like I lay my stuff out the night before. I know like I look at my workout, my swim workout, I write it down. I actually sometimes get kind of excited about it. So I'm like, oh, this is going to be hard. Like I did a 5K swim yesterday and I looked at it and I was like, he wants me to hit that interval. And I did it and it was no big deal. But I was like, okay. So like I kind of use those little mental games to like to keep myself in motion. And so that way, like I know I need to do this and like I'm not the best at like having a morning routine, but when I do kind of nail that morning routine, and I think part of it is we're doing a renovation. Like literally both bathrooms upstairs are being totally torn up. So like my bathroom's torn up. I've got a dog that's like kind of out of sorts. So it's sometimes is like just figuring out like what's the next thing and just keeping myself moving forward. Like I need to get to the pool by this time because I need to get to work by this time. And it's not sometimes about motivation, Heather. It's more just about discipline.
Yeah, always. I'm glad you brought that up because we hit on that last week too, and that motivation is fleeting. Discipline, you can always be disciplined.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to share before we say goodbye?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I'm like, you and I could talk all day, but yeah,
yeah.
thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we might see you again. We love highlighting local athletes, and you've been a pleasure to talk to. So thank you so much. And you were very disciplined today by getting your workout before you arrived on the show. You look
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
Oh,
Have a great rest
thanks.
of your day.
Thanks, Heather. You too.
Okay.